After years of caring for his mother, my own son betrayed me, and my last move ruined his greed. That is not just a sentence, it is my life. If you have ever poured your soul into someone only to be abandoned when you needed them most, you will understand the pain behind these words. My story is not one of fiction. It is the story of a man who gave everything, his health, his youth, his strength, to care for the woman he loved, only to discover that the child he raised with those same hands would turn away from him when loyalty mattered most. Before I begin, please subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? When I look back at my life, I remember the years when my wife was still alive. She was my everything. Her laugh, her presence, even the sound of her breath at night gave me purpose. Then sickness came, and it took her away slowly, painfully, day by day. For years, I was not just her husband. I was her nurse, her caretaker, her protector. I carried her when her legs failed. I fed her when her hands shook. I whispered prayers for her when the pain was unbearable. Every wrinkle on my face is carved from those years. Every ache in my bones is the weight of that love. But what makes the story tragic is not her suffering. It is what came after. Because I was not afraid of her illness. I was afraid of being left alone. I thought my son would never let that happen. I thought the boy we raised would carry forward the love we gave him. I thought wrong. I remember the days when my wife was still strong, before the illness took her body away, piece by piece. She was the heart of our home, the warmth that held us together. She had a way of making even the smallest moment feel precious. Her cooking, her smile, the way she would scold me for forgetting to rest when I worked too hard. And when she fell ill, I made a vow to myself and to her. I would never let her suffer alone. That vow became my purpose. Day after day, I became her shadow. I learned to cook meals she could swallow when her strength left her. I learned to lift her gently from the bed to the chair, even when my back screamed with pain. I learned to stay awake at night, watching over her breathing, terrified that one shallow breath might be her last. I gave up gatherings with friends. I gave up hobbies, outings, even small pleasures. My life narrowed into a single mission, keeping her alive, keeping her comforted, keeping her loved. People told me I was strong. They told me I was noble. But the truth is, I didn't feel strong at all. I felt broken, tired, drained. My body grew weaker, my heart heavier. Yet I never once thought of giving up, because love is not about convenience. Love is sacrifice. And if I had to give the rest of my life to her care, I would have done it gladly. Through those years, I also believed I was teaching my son what true loyalty meant. I believed he saw me, saw how I refused to abandon his mother, and that someday he would carry that same loyalty forward. I told myself that all the nights I spent cleaning wounds, all the hours holding her hand through her tears, would serve as lessons for him about what real family devotion looks like. And he seemed to understand. He would pat my back sometimes and say, "Don't worry, Dad. I'll take care of you when this is all over. You won't be alone." Those words became my light in the darkness. I clung to them like a lifeline, believing that when my wife's suffering ended, I would not be left behind in silence. I believed my son's promises. I believed him more than I believed my own fears. And that belief would soon become the cruelest mistake of my life. The years stretched on, and with every passing season, my body reminded me of the cost of devotion. My knees stiffened from the countless times I lifted her frail frame from the bed. My back bent under the weight of both her body and the endless responsibilities that came with caring for someone who could no longer care for herself. My hands grew rough and swollen from cooking, cleaning, washing, and carrying out every task that kept our home functioning. Yet, I never complained. Each scar, each ache, felt like proof that I was fulfilling the promise I made to her the day we married, to stand beside her in sickness and in health. But sacrifice does not come without a price. My friends began to disappear, one by one, their invitations fading after too many refusals. They wanted me to join them for dinners, to share stories and laughter, but I could not leave her side. Birthdays, anniversaries, reunions, those moments belonged to others. My world was reduced to the four walls of our bedroom, where the ticking clock often felt louder than my own heartbeat. I aged faster than my years, and the mirror began to show a man worn thin, hollowed by duty. Even my health began to unravel. Sleepless nights left my body weak. My appetite diminished, and I often forgot to eat as I focused only on feeding her. Doctors warned me that I was pushing myself too hard, that my own heart was under strain, but I brushed them aside. What kind of man would I be if I thought of myself while she suffered in silence? My life was already tied to hers. Without her, what meaning would I have left? Still, through all the exhaustion, I held on to the thought of my son. He was the one bright spot that kept me going. I imagined him watching me and learning. I imagined him understanding that love means more than words. It means sacrifice. I believed, perhaps naively, that I was shaping him into the kind of man who would one day look after me when my own body finally gave out. I told myself that this was the cycle of life. I cared for his mother, and someday he would care for me. That belief became my strength when nothing else remained. But fate, I would learn, had other lessons in store, and they were crueler than I could have ever imagined. My son would often stop by during those difficult years, though not as often as I wished. When he came, he would stand by the doorway, his face lined with discomfort at the sight of his mother's frail body. He rarely stayed long, but when he did, he always found the words I desperately needed to hear. "Don't worry, Dad," he would say, resting his hand on my shoulder. "When this is all over, I'll take care of you. You won't be alone." Those words became my anchor, the promise that kept me standing when my legs wanted to collapse. I believed him with all my heart because he was my son, the boy I raised, the child I once carried in these very arms. Sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I would imagine what life might look like after her suffering ended. I never wanted to think of a world without her, but I knew the day would come when I would wake up alone. And when that moment arrived, I consoled myself with the thought that my son would be there, standing beside me, helping me face the silence. I pictured us sharing meals, talking about the past, and filling the empty house with laughter once more. That vision was the only comfort I had as the weight of caregiving consumed me. But looking back now, I realized there were signs, small cracks in the surface, that I chose to ignore. He was always quick to leave, always restless in my presence. When I spoke about the future, he changed the subject. When I asked him to spend a night so I could rest, he claimed he was too busy. Yet I silenced the doubts in my heart, convincing myself that he was young, that his life was full of responsibilities, and that one day, when the time came, he would make good on his promises. I see now that my hope blinded me. I clung to his words like a drowning man clings to driftwood, believing they would keep me afloat. I never imagined that those words were empty, spoken not out of love, but out of habit. But the truth has a way of revealing itself when you least expect it, and the day would come when I discovered just how hollow his promises really were. The final days of my wife's life are etched into my memory like scars that will never fade. Her body, once strong and full of life, had become fragile. Every breath a battle, every movement a reminder of the cruel hand illness had dealt us. I sat by her bedside for hours, holding her thin hand in mine, whispering the same words over and over. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." She would look at me with tired eyes, and sometimes a faint smile would touch her lips. Those moments felt like treasures, fleeting but priceless, because I knew they were our last. The nights were the hardest. I would listen to her labored breathing and count the seconds between each inhale, terrified that one of them might be the last. My heart was already breaking, but I forced myself to stay strong, to show her that even at the edge of despair, she was not alone. I wanted her to leave this world knowing she was loved until her final breath. And when that breath finally came, when her chest rose one last time and stilled, it felt like the earth itself had been pulled out from under me. I lost not just my wife. I lost my purpose. In that darkness, my son's words were the only light I could cling to. He came to me at the funeral, his face softened with what I thought was compassion. He placed a hand on my back and whispered, "Dad, I'll take care of you now. You don't have to worry anymore." His voice was steady, reassuring, and for a brief moment I believed him completely. I allowed myself to think that even though I had lost my partner, I had not lost my family. I told myself that my wife's spirit could rest in peace, knowing her son was stepping forward to protect me. I even thanked him with tears in my eyes, squeezing his hand and saying, "I always knew you'd be there for me." That moment gave me comfort in my grief, a fragile hope that the cycle of love and sacrifice would continue through him. But life has a way of turning hope into poison. At the time, I could not see the truth hidden behind his calm voice and steady eyes. I could not imagine that those promises, spoken at my lowest point, were nothing more than hollow words. The betrayal waiting for me was sharper than any knife, and it was already on its way. The days after the funeral passed in a haze. The house felt unbearably silent without her presence. I would wake up in the middle of the night expecting to hear her soft breathing, only to be met with a silence so heavy it crushed me. I wandered the rooms aimlessly, touching her belongings, smelling her clothes, clinging to anything that still carried her essence. The bed felt too big, the table too empty, and even the sun that streamed through the windows seemed dimmer, as if the world itself mourned her absence. In those early weeks, my son came around more often. He would bring groceries, sit with me for a while, and ask how I was doing. At first, I thought perhaps I had misjudged his restlessness during the hard years of caregiving. Maybe he had only been afraid, uncomfortable with illness, but now that she was gone, maybe he was ready to step up. His presence gave me a flicker of hope that I wasn't truly alone. I remember one evening clearly. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, where his mother used to serve us tea, and he said, "Dad, you've done more than anyone could have. You gave up everything for Mom. Now it's my turn. You don't have to struggle anymore." His words wrapped around me like a blanket, offering comfort against the cold grief that had settled into my bones. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. For a little while, I allowed myself to think that maybe life would find balance again. We could share meals, rebuild the home that had crumbled under the weight of sickness, and maybe, just maybe, laughter could return to these walls. When he hugged me at the end of those visits, I felt a spark of warmth, as if the bond between father and son was finally being restored. But as I would later discover, appearances can be deceiving. His visits were shorter than I remembered, his phone always buzzing, his eyes often distracted, and while he spoke kind words, there was a hollowness in them that I chose to ignore. At the time, I told myself he was adjusting, that grief had taken its toll on him too. But in truth, something else was already brewing beneath the surface, something far colder, something that would soon strip away the fragile comfort I thought I had left. As the weeks turned into months, I began to notice a shift. My son's visits, once frequent after the funeral, became shorter and less consistent. At first, he would stay for an hour, then half an hour, until eventually he was stopping by only long enough to drop off a few bags of groceries before rushing back out the door. His hugs became quick, distracted gestures, and the warmth I once thought I saw in his eyes was replaced with something distant, almost impatient. I tried to excuse it. I told myself that maybe he was overwhelmed, that grief made him restless and unable to sit still. I reminded myself that he had his own life, his own responsibilities, and perhaps it was unfair of me to expect him to carry the same weight I had carried for so long. But deep down, I couldn't ignore the growing emptiness in our conversations. It felt as though we were strangers sharing polite words, rather than a father and son bound by years of sacrifice and love. One evening, I asked him if he could spend the night with me. The house felt unbearably quiet, and the walls seemed to echo with my loneliness. He sighed, glancing at his phone, and said, "Dad, I've got too much going on. I'll check in on you later this week." Then he left, and I sat alone in the darkness, realizing that the comfort I thought I had found in his presence was slipping away faster than I could grasp it. I tried to reach out more often, calling him just to hear his voice, but half the time my calls went unanswered. When he did pick up, he sounded rushed, distracted, as if speaking to me was an obligation rather than a desire. The more I reached out, the further he seemed to pull away. A cold distance had crept in between us, and though I wanted to believe it was temporary, part of me knew better. There were moments when I caught glimpses of something I couldn't quite name, calculations in his eyes, the way he looked around the house as if assessing it rather than remembering the memories it held. Those fleeting expressions sent a chill through me, but I brushed them aside, desperate to hold on to the hope that my son's promises still meant something. I didn't know then how quickly that hope would shatter, or how deeply his betrayal would cut. The day it happened began like any other. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair where my wife used to sit, when my son walked in with an unusual sense of purpose. His steps were brisk, his tone overly cheerful, as if he was trying to mask something. He sat across from me and said, "Dad, I've been thinking about the future. This house is too big for you now. It's not practical. You shouldn't have to struggle to keep it up." His words struck me like a blow. This was not just a house. It was the place where I built a life with my wife, where we raised him, where every wall held the laughter and tears of decades. I tried to reason with him, telling him that the house was not a burden, but my last connection to the life I once had. But he was insistent. "It's for your own good," he repeated, as though the phrase excused everything. I didn't realize then that his mind had already been made up. Behind his calm explanations and reassuring tone, decisions were already being executed, decisions that had nothing to do with my well-being and everything to do with his own gain. Days later, a man in a suit showed up at my door with papers. Confused, I asked what this was about. He told me the house had been sold. Sold. Just like that. My knees nearly buckled under me as I realized the home I had poured my life into no longer belonged to me. My son had arranged everything without my knowledge, without my consent, and now I was being told to prepare to leave. I confronted him, my voice trembling, asking how he could do this to me. He avoided my eyes and said, "Dad, it's better this way. You don't need this house anymore. You'll be more comfortable somewhere else." His words were smooth, but his eyes betrayed him. There was no compassion there, only calculation. He wasn't thinking of my comfort. He was thinking of the money, the profit, the chance to rid himself of the responsibility he once promised to bear. That night, I sat in the living room for hours, staring at the walls, touching the worn arm of the sofa, breathing in the scent of the place I once called home. Everything felt stolen, ripped away not by strangers, but by my own flesh and blood. It was then I realized that the promises I had trusted were nothing more than illusions. My son had betrayed me in the cruelest way imaginable, and it was only the beginning. After the house was sold, I felt like a guest in my own life, a man stripped of everything familiar. Boxes were packed hurriedly, as if my memories were nothing more than clutter to be cleared away. My son spoke with a rehearsed calmness, telling me over and over that this was for my own good, that I needed somewhere easier, smaller, more manageable. But the truth was laid bare in the hollow echo of my empty home. The place I had built, the place where I had loved and sacrificed, was gone, and I had no say in it. He drove me to what he called a care facility, a place where I would supposedly have company, meals, and support. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew the truth. The building smelled faintly of bleach and loneliness. The halls were dim, lined with faded wallpaper and weary faces staring out from doorways. It was not a place of comfort. It was a place where the forgotten waited for time to swallow them whole. My room was small, with a single bed, a thin dresser, and a window that looked out onto a cracked parking lot. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at the walls, realizing this was what my son believed I deserved. All the years of sacrifice, all the sleepless nights I had spent caring for his mother, had led me here. A bare room in a facility chosen not for love, but for its price tag. When I asked him why this place, why here, he smiled as though he had done me a favor. "Dad, you'll be looked after here. You'll be safe. You don't have to worry about anything anymore." His words sounded kind on the surface, but I could hear the impatience beneath them. He was already halfway out the door, eager to return to his own life, free of the responsibility he had once promised to shoulder. And then, as the days passed, his visits stopped altogether. At first, I waited, telling myself he was busy. I sat by the window, watching for his car, convincing myself he would arrive any moment. But he never did. The phone never rang. The promises he made at his mother's funeral dissolved into silence. I had been cast aside, left in a place where time moved slowly, where each day felt like a reminder that I had been abandoned not by fate, but by my own blood. The first weeks in that place were the hardest. Every morning I would wake up to the sound of distant footsteps in the hallway, the shuffle of nurses, and the faint coughs of the other residents. It was not the sound of life, it was the sound of waiting, waiting for the next pill, waiting for the next meal, waiting for the next day to pass in exactly the same way as the last. I tried to convince myself that this was temporary, that my son would come for me, that he would take me out for dinner or bring me home for weekends. But the chair beside my bed remained empty, and the silence of the phone grew louder with each passing day. I began to notice the pattern of abandonment in that facility. Some residents never received visitors at all, their eyes glazed over with a kind of quiet acceptance. Others clung to the brief visits from family members, soaking up every minute, only to be left behind again in the same suffocating stillness. I became one of them, another forgotten face among the countless others, each of us waiting for someone who had already moved on. The loneliness weighed on me like a stone pressing against my chest. I thought of my wife constantly, replaying memories of her voice, her touch, the way she had once looked at me with trust and love. I wondered if she could see me now, if she knew how quickly our son had abandoned me after her death. The thought twisted in my chest, not just sadness, but a bitter ache that cut deeper than any physical pain. Meals became tasteless, days blurred together, and my body grew weaker. Not from the lack of food or medicine, but from the emptiness that consumed me. I stopped waiting by the window because I knew he would not come. I stopped calling because I knew he would not answer. A father should never have to beg for his child's love, yet here I was, left with nothing but memories of promises that turned to lies. Sometimes at night I would whisper aloud, "Why, son? Why would you leave me here?" But the only reply was the humming of the fluorescent light above me and the creak of the old pipes in the wall. That silence was my answer. I had been abandoned, not by chance but by choice. Just when I thought the silence would consume me, a familiar face appeared at the doorway of my small, dimly lit room. It was Clara, my neighbor from across the street, the woman who had lived next to us for years. She stood there with a warm smile and a basket in her hands. For a moment, I thought I was dreaming, because I had almost forgotten what it felt like to see someone who genuinely cared. "I couldn't stop thinking about you," she said softly, setting the basket on my table. Inside were homemade cookies and a small photo of her garden in full bloom, a simple gift, but one that made my chest ache with emotion. Clara had always been kind. During the years of my wife's illness, she would sometimes drop by with soup or offer to run errands when she noticed I was too exhausted to leave the house. I had always thanked her, but in my pride, I never truly leaned on her. Yet now, in this place where I had been abandoned, she was the only one who came. Not out of obligation, not out of guilt, but because she wanted to. Her visits soon became the highlight of my days. She would sit by my bed, telling me stories about the neighborhood, about the flowers blooming in her yard, about little things that reminded me of life beyond those walls. She asked about my wife, listened as I spoke of her, and never once looked away when my eyes filled with tears. Where my son had turned cold and distant, Clara was present, attentive, and patient. Sometimes she would bring small comforts, fresh fruit, a knitted blanket, even a radio so I could listen to music again. Each gift was more than just an object. It was a reminder that I still mattered to someone. And as she sat with me, holding my hand during moments of weakness, I felt something stir inside me that I thought had long been buried. Hope. I realized then that family is not always defined by blood. Family is found in the people who show up, the ones who choose to stand by you when it would be easier to turn away. Clara had no obligation to me, no responsibility. Yet she gave me more kindness in those visits than my own son had shown me in months, and that kindness began to heal a part of me I thought was already dead. The more Clara visited, the more I began to notice the contrast between her presence and my son's absence. Each time she walked through that door, she brought with her a light that pushed back the shadows of that facility. She asked me about my day, she listened without impatience, and she treated me not like a burden, but like a friend whose company she genuinely valued. When she laughed, it filled the room with a warmth I had not felt since my wife's laughter faded from this world. Meanwhile, my son's silence grew louder. Weeks turned into months without a single visit, without even a call. I had stopped expecting him, but that didn't stop the ache. There were nights when I replayed his words at his mother's funeral, hearing again his promise. "I'll take care of you now, Dad." How quickly that promise had dissolved into nothing. I thought about the house he had taken from me, the home sold behind my back, and the way he had left me here like unwanted furniture. The betrayal cut deeper with each passing day, and the only thing that softened it was the kindness of someone who owed me nothing. I began to wonder what love truly meant. Was it the bond of blood, or was it the actions we take for one another? My son had my blood, but his actions showed me I meant nothing to him. Clara, on the other hand, had no tie to me except the fence that once separated our yards. Yet she showed me more love, more respect, more loyalty than my own flesh and blood. Sometimes she would sit with me for hours, listening as I shared old stories of my wife, stories I thought no one wanted to hear anymore. She would smile, nod, and ask questions, as though those memories mattered to her too. She made me feel seen. She made me feel human again. And in those moments, something inside me shifted. I realized I was clinging to an illusion, waiting for a son who had already chosen to abandon me. It was then that the first thoughts of what I should do with what little remained of my life began to take shape. I had always assumed my son would inherit everything, that the years of sacrifice would be honored in that way. But as I looked at Clara, at her loyalty and her quiet kindness, I began to see a different truth. Love is proven by action, not by blood, and one day soon I would act on that truth. The idea first came to me one evening as Clara was leaving. She had brought me a basket of fresh fruit, and before walking out she smiled and said, "You're not alone, you know. I'm here for you." Those words echoed in my heart long after she left. Alone. That was what I had been afraid of all these years, what I thought my son would protect me from. But the truth was, he had left me more alone than anyone else ever could. And here was Clara, a neighbor, not bound by blood or duty, giving me the very comfort he had promised, but never delivered. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of my small room, and thought about everything I had left in this world. My wife's memory, my years of sacrifice, the home that had been stolen from me, and the modest savings and assets that still carried my name. All of it, I realized, was still in my control, even if my son thought he had already taken everything. For the first time since my wife's passing, I felt a spark of strength, a sense of power that betrayal had not completely destroyed. The next week, I asked Clara to drive me into town. She thought I needed something from the pharmacy, but instead, I asked her to take me to my lawyer's office. She hesitated at first, worried about tiring me out, but I insisted. When we arrived, I sat down across from my lawyer, a man who had known my family for decades, and told him plainly, "I want to change my will." He looked at me with surprise, but he listened as I explained everything. How my son had abandoned me, how he sold the home behind my back, how he left me to rot in this facility. And then I told him about Clara, about her loyalty, her kindness, how she had become my true family when my own blood had failed me. Paperwork was signed that day, documents stamped and sealed. Every dollar, every asset, everything that bore my name was placed in Clara's care. My son would inherit nothing, not even the crumbs. For the first time in years, I walked out of that office with my head held high. I didn't tell Clara immediately. I didn't tell anyone. I kept it tucked away like a secret weapon, waiting for the moment it would matter most. And when that moment came, my son would finally learn the cost of betrayal. After the papers were signed, something inside me shifted. For years, I had carried the heavy weight of betrayal, the endless ache of being cast aside by my own flesh and blood. But now, with the ink dry and the documents safely stored, I felt a strange calm settle over me. For the first time since my wife's death, I no longer felt powerless. My son thought he had taken everything from me, but what he didn't know was that I still held the one thing he valued most, the future he thought was guaranteed. And with a few strokes of a pen, I had taken that future from him and placed it in the hands of someone who had earned it. I didn't rush to tell Clara what I had done. She continued visiting as always, bringing laughter, stories, and small comforts to brighten my days. To her, nothing had changed, and in truth, that made the decision even more meaningful. She wasn't helping me because she expected anything in return. She wasn't calculating her actions for profit. She was simply being the kind of person my son had failed to become, and that sincerity made me even more certain I had chosen correctly. Meanwhile, my son's silence stretched on. Months passed without a single visit, not a single call, not even a letter. I heard nothing of him except for whispers from old neighbors who mentioned in passing that he was busy, always busy, living his life without a thought for the father he had left behind. Each time I heard such things, the bitterness inside me burned a little less, replaced instead with quiet satisfaction. He believed he had already moved beyond me, already taken what he wanted. He had no idea that while he was out chasing his own desires, I was sealing his fate with every visit Clara made. I began to sleep better at night. The loneliness of the care facility still pressed down on me, but the knowledge that my son would one day face the consequences of his actions gave me strength. I no longer waited by the window for him to arrive. I no longer whispered his promises into the dark. Instead, I waited for the day he would finally come back, not out of love, but out of greed. And when that day came, I would be ready. Time has a way of revealing truth. While my days in the facility remained quiet and predictable, whispers of my son's life began to reach me through the same neighbors and old acquaintances who still remembered me. They told me things in passing, small details at first, but details that painted a clear picture. My son was not thriving. He was drowning. The money from selling the house had slipped through his fingers faster than sand. Investments gone wrong, reckless spending, debts piling higher and higher. It seemed that no matter how much he tried to hide it, his life was crumbling under the weight of his own choices. I heard that he had bought things he could not afford, lived a lifestyle that looked polished on the surface but hollow underneath. He wanted to be seen as successful, powerful, a man of means. But all the while, creditors knocked at his door, and the cracks in his facade began to spread. It was only a matter of time before he came looking for the very thing he thought he had secured through betrayal, my inheritance. I would sit in my small room at night, the hum of the heater filling the silence, and I would imagine the moment when he would walk through the door, wearing a mask of concern, pretending to care, while his true motives lay hidden just beneath his smile. The thought no longer filled me with dread. It gave me a sense of strength. He thought me weak, forgotten, powerless, but I held the one card that mattered, and he didn't even know it. Clara continued to visit, her kindness steady as ever. She never once spoke of my son, never asked if he had come to see me, though I knew she could sense the hurt behind my eyes. Instead, she filled my days with small joys, reminding me that even in betrayal there can be healing. And as I listened to her talk about her garden, about the seasons changing, I realized that I no longer feared the day my son would return, because I knew he would return, not out of love, not out of duty, but out of desperation. His greed would drag him back to me, and when it did, he would finally see that his betrayal had already sealed his fate. The trap was set, and all I had to do was wait. It happened just as I had imagined. One gray afternoon, after months of silence, the door to my room creaked open, and there he was, my son. He walked in with a forced smile plastered on his face, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. He carried no flowers, no small gift, no sign of genuine affection. Instead, he carried himself like a man rehearsing a role. "Dad," he said warmly, almost too warmly, "I've missed you." His words were soft, but they tasted false, like sugar poured over something rotten. For a moment, I simply stared at him, trying to reconcile the boy I once raised with the man standing before me. I wanted to believe him, to feel the comfort I had once drawn from his promises. But his eyes betrayed him. Behind the practiced concern, I saw calculation. He scanned the room quickly, his gaze lingering not on me, but on the dresser, the clock, the few possessions I had left. It was as though he was already cataloging what might soon be his. He sat down beside me, patting my hand with exaggerated tenderness. "I'm sorry I haven't been around more," he said, lowering his voice as if trying to sound guilty. "Life has been complicated, but I'm here now, and I want to make things right." The words should have moved me, but instead, they stung. I could hear the desperation hidden beneath his tone, the cracks in his act. This was not a son returning to his father out of love. This was a man who needed something. I asked him about his life, curious to see how far he would go in keeping up the facade. He spoke in vague terms, dodging specifics, but the weariness in his face told me more than his words ever could. He was struggling, failing, and he had come to me not because he wanted to, but because he believed I was still his safety net. I nodded, listening quietly, while inside me a storm raged. Part of me wanted to scream, to ask how he dared show his face after abandoning me, but another part of me, the part that had patiently planned and waited, remained calm, because I knew the truth, and soon so would he. As he settled into the chair beside my bed, I decided to test the sincerity of his return. I asked simple questions, questions that carried the weight of years. "Do you remember what you told me at your mother's funeral?" I asked quietly, my voice steady. He shifted uncomfortably, his smile flickering for a moment before returning. "Of course, Dad," he said smoothly. "I told you I'd always be there for you." His words were practiced, too quick, as though he was reciting lines from a script. I pressed a little further. "And where have you been all these months? I've been here waiting. The days are long in this place. I thought you'd visit." His expression tightened, just for a moment, before he quickly masked it with false concern. "I wanted to, Dad, really. But you know how life is. Work, bills, responsibilities. It's been overwhelming. He sighed dramatically, as if hoping I would pity him, as if his excuses could erase the emptiness of all those lonely nights. I nodded slowly, pretending to accept his answer, though inside I felt my patience thinning. I wanted him to admit the truth, to show even a sliver of honesty, but he kept dodging, weaving a web of half-truths and excuses. You know, I said carefully, I always believed that family means being there when it matters. That's why I cared for your mother all those years, even when it nearly broke me. I thought you saw that. I thought you understood what loyalty meant. For the first time, he avoided my gaze, his eyes darting toward the window instead. I do understand, Dad, he muttered quickly, and that's why I'm here now. We can start fresh. We can rebuild. His voice trembled slightly, betraying the desperation he was trying so hard to hide. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. I could see the cracks forming in his mask, the greed gnawing at him beneath the surface. He wasn't here to rebuild. He wasn't here to honor his promises. He was here because his world was collapsing, and he thought I still held the keys to saving him. I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and uncomfortable, knowing that soon the truth would come crashing down around him. The silence between us grew heavier, until finally I decided it was time. I had waited long enough, carried the weight of betrayal long enough. My son leaned forward, his tone soft but trembling. Dad, you know I've always wanted what's best for you. I think maybe it's time we start planning for the future. Together. You don't have to worry about anything. I'll handle it all. His words dripped with false reassurance, but beneath them I could hear the hunger, the greed, the quiet expectation that everything I had would soon belong to him. I looked him directly in the eyes, no longer masking my disappointment. You want to talk about the future? I asked, my voice calm, almost too calm. He nodded eagerly, a spark of relief flashing in his expression. Yes, Dad. I think we should start making arrangements. It'll give you peace of mind. I let out a slow breath and said the words I had been holding on to for months. The arrangements have already been made. Confusion flickered across his face. What do you mean? He asked quickly, his voice sharpening. I mean, I said, leaning forward, that every asset, every dollar, everything I owned, I've already passed it on. And not to you. His smile fell, replaced by a blank stare that quickly twisted into disbelief. What are you talking about? He demanded, his voice rising. I'm talking about the neighbor who showed me kindness when you couldn't even be bothered to visit. I'm talking about Clara, the woman who brought me food, who listened when I spoke, who treated me like a human being when my own son left me to rot in this place. She is my family now, and she will inherit everything. For a moment, he was speechless, his mouth opening and closing like he was struggling to form words. Then his face contorted with rage. You gave it to her? A neighbor? A stranger? How could you do this to me? I'm your son. I sat back, feeling a strange calm wash over me. And I was your father. I raised you. I sacrificed for you. And when your mother needed us most, I showed you what loyalty looked like. You had every chance to prove you were the son I believed in. But you abandoned me. You betrayed me. Blood means nothing without love. The moment the words left my lips, the mask he had so carefully worn shattered completely. His face turned red, his hands clenched into fists, and his voice rose in fury. You can't do this to me, he shouted, his tone trembling between rage and desperation. I'm your son. I'm the one who deserves it. That house, that money, it's mine. It was supposed to be mine. I watched him unravel, and for the first time in years, I felt no weakness, no fear, only clarity. You think you deserve it? I asked quietly, my voice steady as stone. Tell me, what exactly did you do to earn it? Did you sit by your mother's bed when she cried through the night? Did you lift her when her body could no longer hold her? Did you feed her, wash her, comfort her? No. You turned away, too busy, too restless, too selfish. And when she was gone, you sold the home she loved and left me to rot in this place. That was what you thought I deserved. And now you stand here screaming about what you deserve? His anger broke, replaced with panic. He dropped to his knees beside my bed, clutching my hand as though he could force the love back into it. Dad, please, he begged, his eyes wide, his voice cracking. I made mistakes, I know, but I can change. I'll visit more, I'll do better, I promise. Just don't do this to me. Don't give everything to her. His grip tightened, but I pulled my hand away, staring at the stranger my son had become. Then came the threats. His voice hardened, sharp and venomous. If you don't fix this, you'll regret it. People will think you've lost your mind. You're old, weak. I can challenge this, you know. I can fight it. You can't just cut your own son out of your life like this. I leaned back, unshaken, and allowed a small, bitter smile to touch my lips. Fight it if you want. Challenge it. But the papers are signed, the ink is dry, and the law does not bend to greed. You had every chance to be my son, but you threw it away. Now the only thing you'll inherit from me is the weight of your choices, and that will haunt you long after I'm gone. After he stormed out of that room, leaving behind a trail of anger and disbelief, I sat in silence for a long time. The echoes of his shouting still rang in my ears, but instead of pain, I felt a deep and quiet peace. For years, I had carried the weight of abandonment, believing I was powerless against the betrayal of my own blood. But now, I had reclaimed something greater than wealth. I had reclaimed my dignity. He could rage, he could threaten, he could curse my name, but none of it mattered anymore. The future he thought was guaranteed had been taken from him the moment I chose love over greed. Clara visited later that week, as she always did, bringing a vase of flowers she had grown herself. She placed them by the window, their colors bright against the pale walls of my room. She asked about my health, about whether I was eating enough, about whether I needed anything. There was no calculation in her voice, no ulterior motive. She was there simply because she cared, and as I looked at her, I felt the certainty that I had made the right decision. My legacy would not be wasted on a man who had abandoned me, but entrusted to someone who had stood by me when I had nothing left to give. I didn't tell her everything right away. She didn't know yet the full extent of what I had done for her, and she never asked. That was the beauty of her loyalty. It was never tied to expectation. She gave without demanding, and that made her worth far more than anyone related to me by blood. As the days passed, I felt lighter, as though the burden I had carried for so long had finally been lifted. My body was still frail, my days still slow, but my spirit had found a kind of freedom I thought I would never know again. Betrayal had tried to break me, but instead it gave me clarity. It showed me who truly mattered and who never did. And in that clarity I found peace. I had nothing left to fear, nothing left to lose. My revenge was not loud or violent. It was quiet, written in ink, sealed in law, and unchangeable. My son would live with the emptiness he created, and I would rest, knowing that my love, my life, and my legacy were placed exactly where they belonged. Looking back now, I realize my story is not just about betrayal. It is about truth. The truth that blood alone does not define family. The truth that love is measured not in words, but in actions. My son had every chance to honor the sacrifices his mother and I made for him. He had every opportunity to stand by me in my old age, to keep the promises he spoke so easily at her funeral. But when the time came, he chose greed, and greed consumed him. He may have taken my home, he may have abandoned me in a place where many are forgotten, but in the end, it was his choices that left him with nothing. And then there was Clara, a neighbor, not bound by blood or obligation, who stepped forward when my own son stepped away. She gave me compassion when I needed it most, loyalty when I had been stripped of everything else, and kindness that reminded me I was still human, still worthy of love. In the end, she became my true family, the one who earned what my son squandered. My legacy rests with her now, and I feel peace in knowing that my years of sacrifice will not be wasted. I want you, listening to my story now, to take this to heart. Never let anyone tell you that family is only about blood. Family is about love, loyalty, and respect. Sometimes strangers will give you more of those than the people you raised yourself. And when that happens, it is not weakness to acknowledge it, it is strength. So if you've ever felt abandoned, if you've ever felt betrayed by someone who should have loved you most, remember this: you are not alone. There are people out there who will show you kindness, people who will prove their love not through promises, but through actions. Cherish them, protect them, and never be afraid to walk away from those who cannot honor the bond you gave them freely. If my story has touched you, I ask you to subscribe so you won't miss the next one. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Where are you listening from today? Your voice matters here. My story may be over, but together we can share the lessons that betrayal leaves behind.